Chapter 30 of Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please go to LibriVox.org. This recording by Patty Brugman. Nicholas Nickleby, Chapter 30. Festivities are held in honor of Nicholas, who suddenly withdraws himself from the society of Mr. Vincent Crummles and his theatrical companions. Mr. Vincent Crummles was no sooner acquainted with the public announcement which Nicholas had made relative to the probability of his shortly ceasing to be a member of the company, than he evinced many tokens of grief and consternation, and, in the extremity of his despair, even held out certain vague promises of a speedy improvement, not only in the amount of his regular salary, but also in the contingent emoluments appertaining to his authorship. Finding Nicholas bent upon quitting the society, for he had now determined that, even if no further tidings came from Newman, he would at all hazards ease his mind by repairing to London, and ascertaining the exact position of his sister, Mr. Crummles was fain to content himself by calculating the chances of his coming back again, and taking prompt and energetic measures to make the most of him before he went away. "Let me see," said Mr. Crummles, taking off his outlaw's wig, the better to arrive at a cool-headed view of the whole case. "Let me see. This is Wednesday night. We'll have the posters out first thing in the morning, announcing positively your last appearance for tomorrow." "But perhaps it may not be my last appearance, you know," said Nicholas, "unless I am summoned away. I should be sorry to inconvenience you by leaving before the end of the week." "So much the better," returned Mr. Crummles. "We can have positively your last appearance on Thursday, re-engagement for one more night on Friday, and yielding to the wishes of numerous influential patrons who were disappointed in obtaining seats on Saturday. That ought to bring 3 very decent houses." "Then I am to make 3 last appearances, am I?" inquired Nicholas, smiling. "Yes," rejoined the manager, scratching his head with an air of some vexation. "3 is not enough, and it's very bungling and irregular not to have more, but if we can't help it, we can't. So there's no use in talking. A novelty would be very desirable. You couldn't sing a comic song on the pony's back, could you?" "No," replied Nicholas, "I couldn't indeed." "It has drawn money before," said Mr. Crummles, with a look of disappointment. "What do you think of a brilliant display of fireworks?" "That it would be rather expensive," replied Nicholas dryly. "Eightpence would do it," said Mr. Crummles. "You on the top of a pair of steps, with the phenomenon in an attitude, farewell on a transparency behind, and 9 people at the wings with a squib in each hand, all the dozen and a half going off at once. It would be very grand. Awful from the front, quite awful." As Nicholas appeared by no means impressed with the solemnity of the proposed effect, but, on the contrary, received the proposition in the most irreverent manner, and laughed at it very heartily, Mr. Crummles abandoned the project in its birth, and gloomily observed that they must make up the best bill they could, with combats and hornpipes, and so stick to the legitimate drama. For the purpose of carrying this object into instant execution, the manager at once repaired to a small dressing room adjacent, where Mrs. Crummles was then occupied in exchanging the habiliments of a melodramatic empress for the ordinary attire of matrons in the 19th century, and with the assistance of this lady and the accomplished Mrs. Grudden, who had quite a genius for making out bills, being a great hand at throwing in the notes of admiration, and knowing from long experience exactly where the largest capitals ought to go, he seriously applied himself to the composition of the poster. "Heigh ho!" sighed Nicholas, as he threw himself back in the prompter's chair, after telegraphing the needful directions to Smike, who had been playing the meagre tailor in the interlude, with one skirt to his coat, and a little pocket handkerchief with a large hole in it, and a woollen nightcap, and a red nose, and other distinctive marks peculiar to tailors on the stage. "Heigh ho! I wish all this were over." "Over, Mr. Johnson?" repeated a female voice behind him, in a kind of plaintive surprise. It was an ungallant speech, certainly, said Nicholas, looking up to see who the speaker was, and recognizing Miss Snevellicci. I would not have made it if I had known you had been within hearing. What a dear that Mr. Digby is, said Miss Snevellicci, as the tailor went off in the opposite side at the end of the piece with great applause. Smike's theatrical name was Digby. I'll tell him presently for his gratification that you said so, returned Nicholas. Oh, you naughty thing, rejoined Miss Snevellicci. I don't know, though, that I should much mind his knowing my opinions of him. With some other people, indeed, it might be. Here Miss Snevellicci stopped, as though waiting to be questioned. But no questioning came, for Nicholas was thinking about more serious matters. How kind it is of you, resumed Miss Snevellicci, after a short silence, to sit waiting here for him night after night, no matter how tired you are, and taking so much pains with him, and doing it all with as much delight and readiness as if you were coining gold by it. He well deserves all the kindness I can show him, and a great deal more, said Nicholas. He is the most grateful, single-hearted, affectionate creature that ever breathed. So odd, too, remarked Miss Snevellicci, isn't he? God help him and those who have made him say so. He is indeed, rejoined Nicholas, shaking his head. He is such a devilish close chap, said Mr. Fowler, who had come up a little before and now joined in the conversation. Nobody can ever get anything out of him. What should they get out of him? Asked Nicholas, turning round with some abruptness. Zooks! What a fire-eater you are, Johnson, returned Mr. Fowler, pulling up the heel of his dancing shoe. I'm only talking of a natural curiosity of the people here, to know what he has been about all his life. Poor fellow! It is pretty plain, I should think, that he has not the intellect to have been about anything of much importance to them or anybody else, said Nicholas. Ay, rejoined the actor, contemplating the effect of his face in the lamp reflector. But that involves the whole question, you know. What question? Asked Nicholas. Why, the who he is, and what he is, and how you two, who are so different, came to be such close companions, replied Mr. Fowler, delighted with the opportunity of saying something disagreeable. That's in everybody's mouth. The everybody of the theatre, I suppose, said Nicholas contemptuously. In it and out of it, too, replied the actor. Why, you know, Lenville says... I thought I had silenced him effectively, interrupted Nicholas, reddening. Perhaps you have, rejoined the immovable Mr. Fowler. If you have, he said this before he was silenced. Lenville says that you're a regular stick of an actor, and that it's only the mystery about you that has caused you to go down with the people here, and that Crummles keeps it up for his own sake, though Lenville says he don't believe there's anything at it at all, except your having got into a scrape and ran away from somewhere for doing something or other. Oh, said Nicholas, forcing a smile. That's a part of what he says, added Mr. Fowler. I mention it as the friend of both parties, and in strict confidence. I don't agree with him, you know. He says he takes Digby to be more knave than fool, and old Fluggers, who does the heavy business, you know. He says that when he delivered messages at Covent Garden the season before last, there used to be a pickpocket hovering about the coach-stand who had exactly the face of Digby, though, as he very properly says, Digby may not have been the same, but only his brother or some near relation. Oh! cried Nicholas again. Yes, said Mr. Fowler, with undisturbed calmness, that's what they say. I thought I'd tell you, because really you ought to know. Oh, here's this blessed phenomenon at last. Ugh, you little imposition. I should like to... Quite ready, my darling. Humbug. Ring up Mrs. G, and let the favourite wake 'em. Uttering in a loud voice such of the latter allusions as were complimentary to the unconscious phenomenon, and giving the rest in a confidential aside to Nicholas, Mr. Fowler followed the ascent of the curtain with his eyes, regarded with a sneer the reception of Miss Crummles as the maiden, and, falling back a step or two to advance with the better effect, uttered a preliminary howl, and went on, chattering his teeth and brandishing his tin tomahawk, as the Indian savage. So, these are some of the stories they invent about us, and bandy about from mouth to mouth, thought Nicholas. If a man would commit an expiable offence against any society larger